second reader is Maggy Chula, her 7th collection, and again, every poet here tonight has a fistful of publications. And I'm just going to say here, here are Maggy's books, and there are several here. Just This is the newest one. It's published by Mountains and Rivers Press, which is Seas Press. It's her 7th collection. It's tanka, 5-line, poems that have a 1,300-year tradition coming from Japan. And she describes these poems as being more lyrical and emotional than nature-based haiku. They focus more on personal experience such as love, loss, and longing. There's a motive, I think, in a lot of Maggy's work to make things visual, poem painting. And her 12 years in Kyoto, while she taught creative writing at the university level, she also studied traditional woodblock and flower arranging. And seeing poems of hers in train stations and also in coming out of vending machines on what? Tea cans? Tea cans, okay. And these were haiku? Haiku. Okay. In Japanese or? Both. Both Japanese and English. Can you imagine? What a wonderful thing. And the book I brought of hers is an amazing one. It's published by her own press, Katsura Press. What Remains, Japanese Americans in Internment Camps, and it's a collaboration between a quilter, Kathy Erickson, and Maggy. Each quilt has a poem facing. Many of these poems are longer, dramatic monologues spoken in the voice of various internees, a newspaper man become a carpenter, a boy who has a snake collection, a grandmother who has done her own quilt making, and so forth. Although there are also repeated uses of haiku and tanka. In terms of her activities, and they're large, she's the president of the Tanka Society of America. She's also a teacher of these received forms from Japan at Zen centers, schools, and conferences. Her performance, 3 Women Who Loved Love, 3 women of Japanese poets, has seen, it's a single woman program. You play all 3 of them. What an appetite.
In costume.
In costume. It's traveled to Poland, Japan, Canada, and the U.S.
Hi, everybody. I want to thank C for publishing my book so I could read here. Scott for providing this beautiful venue. This is the most beautiful reading space. And Eric for herding us cats here.
Yes.
Getting us all together in the right order. So it's a pleasure to read here. I'm from Portland. I've done a lot of readings in Portland, but I haven't done a reading here for probably 10 years, so happy to be here. I wasn't going to read from this book, but since Eric talked about it, I wanted to read one poem. And as he said, each poem is in the voice of a different person in the camps. And as you probably know, about 120,000 Japanese Americans were taken, wrenched from their homes, forced to go into stockades at first, and then internment camps as they were built later on. Spent about 4 to 5 years in the camps. So I wanted to not only honor each camp, but to honor each person in the camp. So I'm going to read one that I don't usually read, and that is, usually they went very calmly. They were brought up, the culture is to obey people in power. So they went quietly. This woman went quietly. Her husband did not, so he was taken by the FBI into a special camp for protesters, for males, in a federal camp. So this one, and I wish I had a bigger picture of the quilt, but this is the quilt. It's about this size. What I did was I focused on this dark spot because I wanted to write a poem about a woman on the verge of madness from being in the camps. Focused on this. I looked at the geese flying across the moon, very romantic Japanese theme. I turned the geese and the moon into plates. And you can see they could be plates decorated with geese. And I went so far from the original quilt and her mood that I actually asked her permission, so she said fine. This is written in the diary form. Dear Diary, September 22, 1942, Roar, Arkansas. Hot, humid, no clouds. Sitting by the window, hoping for a breeze. Was in a bad mood all day. No word from Masayuki. I'm worried sick. It's been over a month since I got a letter from him in that Justice Department camp where the FBI men took him. Lucy Stewart wrote and said she missed us and was sorry they couldn't store our furniture and stuff. Why didn't I take my beautiful plates with me instead of these useless wool blankets? September 25th, 1942. Woke up itching from chigger bites. Same bad dream. That fat man with black hair on his arm shouting, "What about them dishes? I'll give you $3 for the lot." Horrible. Like it was happening all over again. His hands like bear claws grabbing my wedding plates, my children crying from the car, and Lucy yelling, "Hurry up, we gotta go, no room for the plates." And that sweaty man kept saying, $3, come on, $3. Okay, $2.50. My head hurts. I can't write anymore. September 26, 1942. Why can't I stop thinking about those wedding plates? I had to burn Masako's letter because it was in Japanese. But I remember the best part. My dear sister, I made these plates round so you'll feel American, but I painted on Japanese geese so you will migrate back to your homeland. Did we make the wrong choice leaving Japan and coming here? September 28, 1942. Every meal is liver or wieners or slop suey on heavy white plates. Sometimes I want to take those plates and smash them, slop suey all over the walls, just like when we were leaving, and I took my wedding plate out of that hairy man's hands and threw it on the sidewalk. Smash! And then I couldn't stop. Smash, smash, until there were 12 full moons and flying geese broken into pieces on the sidewalk. And then, oh, that was the best part, seeing that man's angry face when I handed him the empty box and got into the car. Okay, I think this reading tonight's going to be about women, and we'll start from fairly modern period and go back a little bit through the centuries. But first I wanted to talk to you a little bit about tanka, since I was introduced as a teacher. I have to do my little tanka thing, also as president of the Tanka Society of America. So when I say that to people, they say tanka. And, you know, they first think of Tonka toys, T-O-N-K-A, those little yellow dump trucks some of us were allowed to play with. And then they also think of Tonka paintings, scrolls. I'm sure there's one in this store somewhere. Tibetan scrolls with gods and demons on them. T-H-A-N-G-K-A, Tonka. This is T-A-N-K-A, Tonka, and Tonka preceded haiku. And it's written in 5 lines, as Eric said. Tonka has more room, has 2 extra lines, so you get to talk about our relationship with nature and our relationship with what's going on in our lives. So haiku is a brief moment in nature, and Tonka, it has often, I think the best Tonka, have some allusion to nature, but they also are primarily about our lives. So I think people prefer Tonka. I've been doing haiku for 35 years, and I've kind of gone over to the dark side. I call it Tonka the dark side because you can write about anything with Tonka, and you'll see there is a pretty great variety in my new book. tanka was written by women in the Heian era, 794 to 1158. This was the heyday of Japanese literature. It flourished. Everything was done through poetry, and especially courtship. The men and women were judged not only on the poems they exchanged, but also on the paper they wrote them on, the sprig of some natural flower that was blooming that they attached. So it's all a very aesthetic time. And daughters of aristocratic families were sent at age 14 to serve as companions to members of the imperial household, to empresses and princesses and people in the royal family. And what they did was, they worked on their hair and everything, but they also read poetry and wrote poetry together, played koto, and they did the arts together. This, you have to remember, is only 1% of the population, women's population. Most were illiterate at that time. The poems they wrote they created their own language. And the poems they wrote were very subjective and passionate and complex, and they used images. So courtships were done by the exchange of poems, and it was to keep the other person aware of the lover's state of mind. So you always knew where you were standing through the poems, although the poems had innuendos in them. So here's one from Michinaga Fujiwara. He was the leader of Japan in the 11th century, and here he's writing a tanka to Murasaki Shikibu, a lady in waiting, and also, many of you know, the author of the first novel, The Tale of Genji. Here's his. Now I see this lovely maiden flower in bloom. I know for certain that the dew discriminates. Okay, so that's really about her, right? This is her reply. The morning dew does not discriminate. The maiden flower takes on the colors that it pleases. Okay, didn't do too well on that one. He probably attached a maiden flower to that as well. Okay, so he knew where he stood, at least for that moment in time. There was also a woman of the courts named Sei Shonagon. Some of you know her through The Pillow Book, which was made into a movie. She made great lists of things that she liked, disliked, etc. And here's one of her awkward things. Entry 81, awkward things. One has gone to a house and asked to see someone, but the wrong person appears, thinking that it is he who is wanted. This is especially awkward if one has brought a present. Everyday life in the courts. Okay, so I do have a longer poem that I'm going to read. It's called The Poet's Daughter, and the poet is Sei Shonagon, whose retort I just read. So I thought, what would it be like to be a daughter of a famous woman poet of that era? The Poet's Daughter. Oh, before I read it, I was hoping Tim Applegate would be here. He showed me this Briarcliff Review journal, and it's absolutely beautiful. And what they do is they pair the poem with a colored picture like this. And when after they published the poem with another picture, they asked if they could use the poem to make a broadside to make some money for the press. So this is what they came up with, this beautiful image. The Poet's Daughter. I live in a house of scents. In winter, cedar branches, redolent of Ohara forest, hang in my entryway. From the kitchen I awaken to the aroma of green tea, steeped in a pot glazed with plum blossoms. Cherry petals float like memories on the still surface of my bathwater. Perfume of my mother, Sei Shonagon, who tucks sachets filled with herbs into the sleeves of her kimono. After my bath, I peel back the skins of tangerines. When dusk falls, I open Mother's leaflets of poems, written with sumi ink. Inhale the scent of her brushstrokes on faded pages. A stick of incense burns on the family altar. Swirls of sandalwood smoke turn musty, like the ashes of our ancestors. From the hearth, the aroma of soba, earthy noodles, simple as worms. Roots of burdock too, red miso, and the tang of fermented plums. In Japanese, the ideograph for wife is person of the house. You will know me by the fragrances that waft from my robes. I do believe I was a Japanese poet in my previous lifetime, and that's probably why I stayed in Kyoto all those years and brought back to my country kicking and screaming. Yeah, and I'm still writing poems about Japan and now China, so continue with the Asian. This is my new book, Just This. C. Rosenow, Mountains and Rivers Press, did a beautiful job publishing it. And Jonathan Green, the designer, worked with me, and I'm a very fussy person, that's why I have my own press. So he worked with me very closely and created this beautiful production. So thank you, and thank Jonathan and his wife, Dobre, who offered this photograph for the cover. The book is organized into 5 sections, and they have poetic words, like lingering fragrance, to open each section. What I did was I received permission from Jane Hirschfield, who wrote The Ink Dark Moon, translations of Heian-era women, Japanese women poets, with Mariko Aritani, her co-translator. And these poems are so beautiful, I opened each section with one of them. So what I'll do is I'll read that poem first and then move into each section with my own poems. Lingering fragrance. Wakened by the scent of flowering plum, the darkness of the spring night fills me with longing. Izumi Shikibu. Late summer in the garden, just before dusk, touching leaves and flowers as I never touched you. Stargazer lilies, remembering the poem you wrote about musk. That was me. These aren't all about me, by the way. I do have a very mysterious life, but they're not all about me. A spring day spent turning the garden soil to my heart's content. Tonight I will caress you with these earth-bound hands. November morning. I help Mother write her obituary. Wisps of fog shroud the maple leaves. Wisps of fog shroud the maple leaves. Who can say what loneliness is? Which is better, the distant lover you long for, or the one you see daily, without desire. Izumi Shikibu. You sign your letters affectionately. I write, loving you. Picking a scab on my cleavage, I watch it bleed. Picking a scab on my cleavage, I watch it bleed. My parents and in-laws moving towards senility. Suddenly, there's no one I need to impress. Suddenly, there's no one I need to impress. The hollow stems of summer daylilies pull out with ease. Mother has fallen and broken her femur. The hollow stems of summer daylilies pull out with ease. Mother has fallen and broken her femur. Cleaning out Mother's lingerie drawer, the tears in her stocking sewn up so tightly, all my unanswered questions. My mother grew up during the Depression. She saved, recycled, stitched up everything that was broken, and her stockings were always sewn up with these tiny, she hated sewing, but she always sewed them up with these tiny stitches. And I don't know if she wore them, but they were always just so perfectly in her drawer. This is very similar to what the Japanese do, a word like tear, T-E-A-R, it's also tear. So you have that double, impact of that one word. The tears in her stockings sewn up so tightly, the tears. So get a lot of usage from that one word. Hush of crickets. Although the wind blows terribly here, the moonlight also leaks between the roof planks of this ruined house. Izumi Shikibu. Hush of crickets from familiar trees. We leave our home of 17 years without fanfare. Oban is the honoring the dead, and Juji takes place in the beginning of August. People go up to the grave sites and clean them and offer flowers. At Oban, a priest chants the Lotus Sutra. One by one, the wind blows out. Candles lit for the dead. One by one, the wind blows out. Candles lit for the dead. Displayed in the window of a consignment shop, my old evening gown on a flaxen-haired maiden, the size I once was. Every Christmas a lump of coal in his stocking, my brother, now a salesman, with pearly white teeth. Did anyone else get a lump of coal in their stocking? It's an East Coast thing, I think. He's still a very naughty boy, but he has pearly white teeth. Trying to remember. This pine tree by the rock must have its memories too. After 1,000 years, see how its branches lean towards the ground. Oh no, no, Komachi. Summer has ended and we have parted, yet spiders continue to spin their webs from one dead stem to another. here's a holiday one. My sister and I drink Bloody Marys and make Thanksgiving pies. 4 and 20 stories bubble up through the crusts. It's also a Japanese technique where you make an allusion to something that is familiar to people. Yeah, that was such a good idea. We made 4 pies and we couldn't remember if we put sugar in or salt, or both. They all came out fine. 30 years later, I find them pressed in my journal. What was that flower? And who is that man? 30 years later, I find them pressed in my journal. Who was that? What was that flower? And who is that man? After my coworker shows me his collection of mounted butterflies, my sexual fantasies fly out the window. That was written to a prompt. I don't have coworkers anymore. Okay, and here's the last section. In haiku, both haiku and tanka poets write a death poem just at the moment before they die. They have their ink already ground and their brush ready, and they pen their death poem. And this is Izumi Shikibu's death poem. The last word she wrote before she died was moon. Yesterday's desires. The way I must enter leads through darkness into darkness. O moon above the mountain's rim, please shine a little further on my path. Izumi Shikibu. Yesterday's desires. What were they? A vase without flowers holds only itself. A vase without flowers holds only itself. The essence of each of these rocks now painted on canvas. One by one, we return them to the river. One by one, we return them to the river. Meditation. There's always something to let go of. The long slant of ash on the incense stick. The long slant of ash on the incense stick. This morning, pale white light shines through the window. It's snowing again, and Mother is gone. It's snowing again, and Mother is gone.